That seat's for my mom. Get out, Kendra said, her voice sharp, unapologetic. Before I could respond, her hands were on my shoulder, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor. I didn't drop the bouquet of lilies I brought, though one of the stems bent awkwardly beneath me. The pie container cracked open as it hit the hardwood oozing filling at the edges. I looked up from the ground, disoriented for a second, not from the fall, but from the silence. Ethan stood nearby. He saw it. He saw all of it, but his arms stayed folded, his face unreadable. He didn't move toward me, didn't ask if I was all right. He just stared at the dining room wall like it was more urgent than his own mother sitting on the floor. Kendra's mother gave a small gasp, almost performative, then turned to adjust her scarf and took the now empty chair. Like nothing happened. No one helped me up. I picked myself up, knees aching from both the impact and the embarrassment. My hands trembled, not from pain, but from humiliation. I brushed off my slacks and looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge what had just happened. Nothing. I placed the bent bouquet on the counter near the sink, wiped the pie tin with a paper towel, and stood there for a moment like a guest in someone else's house. Kendra was already clinking glasses with her mother. Ethan poured her wine. I had raised him better than this. At least I thought I had. I walked slowly to the living room and lowered myself onto the edge of the couch. I didn't want to cry, not here. I looked down at my scuffed palms and wondered when this family stopped being mine. Someone turned up the music. The sound of silverware and forced laughter drowned out the voice inside me that wanted to scream. I sat there perfectly still as the scent of my crushed pie filled the room. I stayed on the edge of the couch, back straight, hands folded in my lap. No one looked my way, but I could hear them, plates clinking, glasses lifted, laughter in bursts, loud enough to feel forced. Kendra's mother had taken my seat, and now she held the room like it was hers to command. Every joke she told was met with polite chuckles. Every comment was praised like wisdom. She raised her glass and toasted herself. I sat quietly and watched. Ethan passed her the roasted chicken and made sure she had the best cut. Kendra poured her another glass of wine and leaned in close like they were the family. I was just something else. Something left over. No one asked why I hadn't joined them. No one asked about the pie. I smoothed the hem of my blouse and tried to focus on my breathing. In, out, even, controlled. Years ago, I'd taught myself that silence could be power, but today it just felt like erasure. Grandma, a small voice whispered beside me. My granddaughter. She held out a napkin, her brows furrowed in quiet concern. You're bleeding. I looked down and saw the small scrape on my palm. I hadn't even noticed. Thank you, sweetheart, I whispered and reached for it. But before I could touch the napkin, Ethan's hand came down firm. He pulled her gently but deliberately away from me. Go sit down, honey, he said, not even glancing at me. We don't want to interrupt. The girl hesitated, looked at me again, then returned to the table. I sat there as the laughter resumed. The room didn't feel warm anymore. It felt dense, like air that had forgotten how to move, like I had to work harder just to breathe in it. I reached for my purse, still by my feet, and placed it on my lap, not because I was ready to go, but because I needed something to hold on to, something that still belonged to me. And then I remembered the drawer in my hallway back home. The ride home was silent. No music, no radio, just the steady sound of tires against pavement and the hum of my thoughts filling every inch of the car. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't go inside right away. I just sat there, both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the front porch. Light flickering like it couldn't decide whether to hold on or let go. I used to be like that too. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and walked to the hallway. Opened the drawer labeled property, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I needed proof that I still existed somewhere on paper. My fingers brushed against the edge of the manila folder. And just like that, the years came flooding back. I remembered the day I sold my wedding ring. I didn't tell Ethan. He was still in college, stressed and juggling part-time jobs. He called me crying one night about not making tuition. I told him I'd figured it out. The next morning, I walked into a pawn shop and handed over the last piece of gold I had from his father. I remembered those nights when I sat beside his bed with a cool cloth fighting fevers, whispering promises to a boy who had already lost too much. I was both mother and father, disciplinarian and safety net. I went without so he could have more. I never expected anything in return. And later, when Ethan and Kendra said they needed more space, I offered something bigger than money. I moved out. It was the same house my husband and I had built together, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. I packed my things, found a smaller place nearby, and handed them the keys. No fuss, no conditions. I just said, make it yours. They took the house, took the help, took the silence. But not once did they ask what it had cost me to give it. I closed the drawer, the edges of the folder still peeking out like an untold secret. Then I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stared out the window. They thought the house was theirs, but they never asked who it belonged to. The next morning, I returned to that same drawer, not for nostalgia this time, but for clarity. My hand didn't hesitate. I pulled the folder out and laid it on the kitchen table like it deserved the weight of sunlight. Inside was the deed transfer form, still blank at the bottom where my signature should have gone. I remembered when Ethan first brought it over a few years back. He had said it casually, like he was asking for a grocery list. It'll just make taxes easier, Mom. You don't really need to be on it anymore. I'd nodded, told him I'd think about it. But I didn't sign. Not because I didn't trust him, because something in me whispered, not yet. And now here it was. All these years later. Still unsigned. Still mine. I ran my finger along the edge of the paper, tracing where ink was never laid. How many people had they told the house was theirs? How many dinners? How many holidays had they hosted inside these walls as if they'd built them? They hadn't. They hadn't scrubbed the floors after Ethan threw up from the flu. They hadn't painted the walls late into the night after my husband died, trying to cover the silence with color. They hadn't made sacrifices to keep this house when the heating broke, when money ran thin, when every bill came with a threat. I had. They may have lived in it, but I had survived in it. I folded the deed back into the folder, closed it carefully, and pressed both hands flat on top, like I was sealing in everything they had forgotten. They thought I had given it away, but I never did. And now I wasn't sure I wanted to. I hadn't planned to go back so soon, but my granddaughter had left her stuffed cat in my car. It was tucked under the passenger seat, its fur matted, one ear nearly torn off. I knew she wouldn't sleep without it. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't see Ethan's car, just Kendra's mother's bright blue SUV. I walked up to the porch toy in hand, but paused when I heard her voice through the open kitchen window. She was on the phone, laughing. No paperwork needed. Her mother-in-law's old, she won't even notice. I stood still, one foot on the porch step, the other in the flower bed. My fingers tightened around the stuffed cat. They said she gave it to them years ago. What's she going to do now? She's barely around. I didn't knock. I turned around and walked back to my car, the toy still in my hand. That night, I went into the hall closet and pulled out the box no one had touched in years, my husband's things neatly stored in a battered leather briefcase. I placed it on the dining table and opened it slowly, half expecting dust to rise like a ghost. There it was, the original deed, the property tax statements, the mortgage payoff letter, all with my name at the top, all untouched, all real. I stared at them for a long time. My late husband's handwriting was on some of the notes' initials scrawled in the margins. I remembered how careful he'd been with every decision, how he'd told me just months before he passed. Keep everything in your name. It's safer that way. And I had. I slid the documents back into the envelope, sealed it, and placed it in my bag. The cat toy was still sitting on the counter where I'd left it. I picked it up, smoothed its ear, and set it gently by the front door for her. They'd assumed I wouldn't notice. But I had noticed, and now I was remembering everything they didn't think I still had. The office was small, tucked above a used bookstore, with windows that let in the soft gray light of an overcast morning. I chose this lawyer on purpose. Quiet, independent, the kind who didn't ask more questions than needed. He offered me coffee. I declined. I sat across from his desk and placed the thick envelope in front of him. He unfolded the documents, slowly reading through them with the kind of deliberate attention that made me respect him instantly. I didn't interrupt. I just waited. 10 minutes passed before he looked up. "These are original and legally sound," he said. "And according to county records, you're still the sole owner of the property." I nodded once. No liens, no title transfers, no legal change of ownership. "It's all yours, Ms. Vess." I looked out the window for a moment before turning back to him. "Then it's time I start acting like it." He didn't blink, just leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "What would you like to do?" "I want the locks changed. And I want their names formally removed from any mailing or utility listings connected to my address. I'll have a moving company pack their things. I don't need a fight, just a clean line drawn." He nodded. "It can be done." I slid a check across the table to cover the retainer. It was already written out. I'd made the decision the night I found those papers in the briefcase. I just needed to hear it confirmed. He took the check, placed it in a drawer, and handed me a simple form to sign. I wrote my name slowly with full pressure from pen to paper. My name, the one they'd tried to erase without ever saying it out loud. When I left his office, the wind had picked up. Leaves were blowing across the sidewalk, but I didn't pull my coat tighter. I just walked, slowly, steadily, the weight in my chest replaced with something firmer. Not anger, not revenge, certainty. And now I was ready to make room for what came next. They were gone for the weekend, some trip Kendra had posted about online. A cabin by the lake, matching flannel, filtered smiles. I didn't comment. I just took note of the dates. Saturday morning, the moving truck pulled into the driveway at exactly 9 a.m. The crew was professional, efficient. I had labeled every room, made a full inventory of what wasn't mine. Their things were boxed with care, each item wrapped and sealed, stacked neatly along the garage wall, just as I'd instructed. Nothing was broken. Nothing was touched with spite. I didn't keep anything of theirs, not even the wine glasses I had once given them as a housewarming gift. Those too were boxed marked kitchen, Kendra. The house emptied out like it was exhaling. Piece by piece, it became recognizable again. By early afternoon, it was quiet. Then I went into the garage alone, moved past the boxes, and found the one item I had set aside. My late husband's coffee table oak, hand-sanded with joints that never needed glue. They'd stored it behind the shelves years ago, called it too old-fashioned. I ran my hand along its edge. Then I carried it back inside. It was heavier than I remembered, but I didn't ask for help. I dragged it into the living room, scuffing the floor a little fine by me. I set it exactly where it used to be, right in the center, and sat on the couch in front of it. The wood creaked slightly as it settled. For the first time in years, the room felt like it belonged to me again. No voices echoing over mine, no sideways glances, no one rearranging furniture around my absence. Just this table, this room, this silence. And I hadn't needed to say a word. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I heard the car pull into the driveway. It was later than expected, nearly dusk. I didn't get up. I just sipped my coffee, letting the warmth settle into my hands. From the window, I watched them get out of the car laughing. Ethan carried a bag over his shoulder. Kendra was already checking her phone. They didn't notice the locks at first. Not until Ethan reached for the doorknob and it wouldn't turn. He rattled it once, then again harder. That's when he saw the note taped to the glass. Items in garage. This home is no longer available. I'd printed it in large, clear font. No signature, no drama, just the facts. Kendra stepped back like she'd been slapped. She said something sharp. I couldn't hear the words, but her mouth moved fast. Ethan pulled out his phone. It rang on the counter beside me. I let it ring. No voicemail. He called again. Then again. I turned the phone over face down. Took another sip. They moved toward the garage. The motion sensor light blinked on. I saw Ethan unlock it and look inside. They stood there for a long time, surrounded by neat stacks of boxes, each one labeled by room, organized by category. Nothing damaged. Nothing missing. Just no longer inside. I got up and added a splash of cream to my coffee. The fridge hummed softly behind me, the house still and familiar. I walked back to the table, sat down, and faced the window. Ethan was pacing now. Kendra had her arms crossed. She kept gesturing toward the house, but he just shook his head. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I simply watched them from my side of the glass, the same way they had once watched me, small, silent, and unwelcome. The sun slipped lower behind the trees, and the porch lights turned on automatically. Inside, the air felt different, lighter, mine again. I leaned back in the chair they'd once told me wasn't mine and waited for the quiet to settle in all the way. I knew they'd try to control the story. That's what people do when their version of events starts slipping. Kendra told everyone I was confused. Said I had been acting off for months. She's older now, you know how it is. She told my sister-in-law, who then repeated it to a cousin, who repeated it to someone else. By the end of the week, I'd apparently changed the locks because I thought I lived in a different year. I didn't defend myself, but someone else did. It started with a link in a group chat. I wasn't in it, but I heard about it later. A few seconds of doorbell camera footage. Clear, steady. No edits. No voiceover. Just the truth, Kendra shoving me backward at the Mother's Day table while my son looked the other way. There was no audio, but you didn't need it. The image said enough. People didn't comment publicly. No one called to apologize. But the silence changed shape. It softened. And then one night my phone lit up with a message. "Grandma, are you okay?" It was from my granddaughter. The same little girl who had tried to hand me a napkin that day. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Now I am." She sent a heart. I didn't reply. I just sat with it. The next day, someone left a plate of cookies on my porch. No note, just familiar handwriting on the container. Another relative dropped off tulips with a card that read, "Thinking of you." No one said why. No one had to. I watered the tulips and placed them in the center of the table beside the coffee cup I always used beside the handmade oak table they had once stuffed in the garage. Truth, it seems, has a way of finding its way through cracks. And when it did, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still, ready finally to wake up and feel like the house was mine in more than name. The morning was soft with rain. I opened the window above the sink and let the scent of wet grass and clean air move through the house. It carried a quiet kind of peace, something I hadn't felt in years. I pulled out flour and butter and peeled apples with slow, steady hands. There was no occasion, no audience, just the hum of the oven warming and the rhythm of my own breath. I wasn't baking for anyone this time. I just missed the smell, the comfort of crust, crisping at the edges, sugar bubbling beneath. When the pie was cooling on the counter, I poured 2 mugs of coffee. One for me, the other for the small possibility of a visit. I placed it on the table beside mine just in case. But no one knocked. No one called. And that strangely felt okay. The house didn't creak like it used to. Or maybe I just wasn't listening for disruptions anymore. I moved slowly, intentionally, past the kitchen and into the dining room. The chairs were all lined up neatly, but I stopped at the one at the head of the table, the one they'd told me didn't belong to me. I pulled it out. Calm. No hesitation. Then I sat. There was no voice telling me to move. No hands on my shoulders. No tension humming through the walls. Just the quiet crackle of rain outside and the sound of my own chair accepting my weight. The room held me without question, as if it had just been waiting. I took a sip of coffee, still hot, and rested my hand on the edge of the table. My husband's table. My house. My name on every page that mattered. Everything they tried to claim I had taken back without shouting, without pleading, without striking back in the way they expected. I didn't need to remind them. Because I remembered. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel erased. I felt whole. And finally, I didn't need permission to sit.